that we never look back. Here we go, 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 let us heal and grow. You won't be alone, we're unstoppable. Don't be afraid to show what we're going for. This is what we know. Here we come back to life, we're still breathing. Standing up, everybody's gonna see it. Oh, all you need to know is that we're holding on. Even if we fall, we will rise up and we follow the path that we believe in. No, we're not gonna stop until we reach it. Oh, all you need to know is that we're holding on. We rise up from the dust and claim our throne. We rise up from the dust and claim our throne. We rise up from the dust and claim our throne.
Okay, good evening. It is time to get into some more of the secret history of the world. So we're up to chapters 21 and 22 tonight, and there are 28 total. So there's no way I'm going to finish this book by the end of the year, unfortunately, but that's okay. Well, we won't be far off a week, um, roughly. So it'll still go on the 2024 um, reading playlist before I start the next one. But it also means that we're going to have to start thinking about the next book. 3 more readings after tonight, so I'll be thinking about that. I might put out an X survey to see. But anyway, enough of that. Let's get into the reading. So we're on chapter 21, and the title for it is The Rosicrucian Age, the German Brotherhoods, Christian Rosenkreuz, Hieronymus Bosch, and The Secret Mission of Dr. D. Okay. Little is known about Meister Eckhart, the shadowy 13th century German mystic, but just as his contemporary Dante can be seen as the source of the Renaissance, Eckhart can be seen as the source of the broader but more slowly moving Reformation. In Eckhart, we can also see the source of a new form of consciousness which would lead Northern Europe to world domination. Born in near Gotha, I'm not sure why he put that way, but okay. Uh, Gotha in Germany in 1260, he entered a Dominican friary, became a prior, and eventually succeeded Thomas Aquinas teaching theology in Paris. His great opus Tripartitum, as ambitious in scope as the Summa Theologica, was never finished. He died while on trial for his life, accused of heresy. A few sermons have come down to us, some of them transcribed by people in Strasbourg. They had never heard anything like these notions before. Quote, I pray to God to rid me of God. If I myself were not, God would not be either. If I were not, God would not be God. God is within, we are without. The eye through which I see God and the eye through which God sees me is the same eye. He is he because he is not he. This cannot be understood by the outer man, only the inner man. Find the one desire behind all desires. God is at home. It is we who have gone out for a walk. Through nothing I become what I am. Only the hand that erases can write the true thing. Okay, end quote. Interesting. There's a little touch of Taoism in there in some of those statements. Um, anyway, these sound exceptionally modern. You would probably even be a bit surprised to hear them coming out of the mouth of your local clergyman today. Like a Zen master, Meister Eckhart tries to shock us out of fixed ways of thinking, sometimes with what at first sounds like nonsense. He also teaches an Oriental style of meditation that involves both sustained detachment from the material world and emptiness of the mind. He says that when the powers have all been withdrawn from their bodily form and functions, when man has absconded from the senses, then he, quote, lapses into the oblivion of things and of himself, end quote. Okay, he went right into the Eastern stuff too, and I did not read ahead. It was just my first thought. Like Buddhist emptiness, this oblivion is a void containing infinite and inexhaustible possibilities, and so a place of rebirth and creativity. It is also a difficult and dangerous place. Eckhart was showing the way not of consolation for a harsh, repressed life, not rewards deferred, but a strange and testing dimension you enter at your peril. Quote, the desert of the Godhead where no one is at home, end quote. Like Muhammad, like Dante, Eckhart had direct personal experience of the spirit worlds. Again and again, what he reported back is not what you'd expect. Quote, when you're frightened of dying and you're holding on, you'll see demons tearing your life away. If you've made your peace, you'll see that the demons are really angels freeing you from the earth. The only things that burn us in the part you won't is the part you won't let go, your memories, your attachments, end quote. Eckhart is something Eckhart is sometimes spoken of as one of, quote, the 12 sublime masters of Paris, end quote. A phrase that reminds us of the ancient traditions of hidden masters and adepts, the Great White Brotherhood, the 36 righteous of Kabbalistic tradition, the Brotherhood on the Roof of the World, the Inner Circle of Adepts, or the Nine Unknown. According to ancient traditions, knowledge, the way to gain experience of the spirit worlds is passed on by an initiatic chain of transmission from master to pupil. In the East, this is sometimes called satsang. It is not just a matter of information passed on by word, but a sort of magical mind-to-mind process. Plato may be read as referring to something similar when he talks of mimesis. Uh, in the allegory of the cave, Plato is inviting his pupil to create an imaginative image which will work on his mind in a way that operates beyond the narrowly rational. In Plato's opinion, the best writing, he is talking of Hesiod's poetry, casts a hypnotic spell that carries with it the transmission of knowledge. An initiate I knew told me how, when he was a young man living in New York, his master had reached over to him, drawing a circle on a table, and asked him what he saw. A tabletop, he replied. That is good, said the master. The eyes of a young man should not look outward. Then, without saying any more, he leaned forward and touched my friend on the forehead between the eyes with his outstretched finger. Immediately the world faded, and he was dazzled by a vision of what seemed to him a cold white goddess of the moon, carrying a skull and a rosary. She had 6 faces, each with 3 eyes. The goddess danced, and my friend lost track of time. Then after a while the vision faded and shrank until it became a dot and disappeared. My friend knew, though, it was still living inside him somewhere like a burning seed, and would do so forever. His master said, "You saw it?" I was thrilled when I heard this story because I knew I was very close to the chain of mystic transmission. The direct spiritual experience that Meister Eckhart talked about with such conviction in his sermons was experience of a kind organized religion no longer seemed able to provide. The church seemed pedantically tied to the dead letter of the law, both in theology and ritual. So it was in a climate of spiritual dissatisfaction and restlessness that loose and shadowy associations arose among like-minded people, groups of lay people questing for spiritual experience, wandering stars, quote unquote, as they were sometimes known, were said to meet in secret. The brethren and sisters of the free spirit, the brethren and sisters of the common life, the family of love, and the friends of God. Stories were rife among all levels of society in Germany, the Netherlands, and Switzerland, even among the underprivileged and alienated poor, of people being approached by mysterious strangers who took them to secret meetings or even on journeys into strange otherworldly dimensions. One of the more intriguing notions associated with the secret societies is that you can never track them down. Instead, they operate some form of occult but benevolent surveillance. When the time is right, when you are ready, a member of the secret schools will come to you and offer himself as your spiritual guide or master. The same initiate told me how, at a gathering of top academics, who all shared an interest in the esoteric, he himself was an art historian. It eventually emerged that the great teacher in their presence was none of the doctors or professors, but the cleaning lady with mop and pail at the back of the lecture theater. Such stories may have an apocryphal air about them, but they also have a universal resonance. Oh, I didn't even realize we were in an ad. I am sorry. Um, so I don't know where we left off. I'm going to go back a bit because I was not paying attention. Um, so you probably missed a bit of that. So I'll just start at the top of this page. Um, so the master had asked, "Did you see it?" Um, anyway, that is good," said the master. "The eyes of you." Oh, no, no, no. I jumped ahead. Um, okay. Anyway, um, "That is good," said the master. "The eyes of a young man should not look outward." Then, without saying any more, he leaned forward and touched my friend on the forehead between the eyes with his outstretched finger. Immediately the world faded, and he was dazzled by a vision of what seemed to him a cold white goddess of the moon carrying a skull and a rosary. She had 6 faces, each with 3 eyes. The goddess danced, and my friend lost track of time. Then, after a while, the vision faded and shrank into until it became a dot and disappeared. My friend knew, though, it was still living inside him somewhere like a burning seed, and would do so forever. His master said, "You saw it?" I was thrilled when I heard this story because I knew I was very close to the chain of mystic transmission. The direct spiritual experience that Meister Eckhart talked about with such conviction in his sermons was experience of a kind organized religion no longer seemed able to provide. The church seemed pedantically tied to the dead letter of the law both in theology and ritual. So it was in a climate of spiritual dissatisfaction and restlessness that loose and shadowy associations arose among like-minded people, groups of lay people questing for spiritual experience. Wandering stars, as they were sometimes known, were said to meet in secret. The brethren and sisters of the free spirit, the brethren and sisters of the common life, the family of love, and the friends of God. Stories were rife among all levels of society in Germany, the Netherlands, and Switzerland, even among the underprivileged and alienated poor, of people being approached by mysterious strangers who took them to secret meetings or even on journeys into strange otherworldly dimensions. One of the more intriguing notions associated with the secret societies is that you can never track them down. Instead, they operate some form of occult, but benevolent surveillance. When the time is right, when you are ready, a member of the secret schools will come to you and offer himself as your spiritual guide or master. The same initiate told me of how at a gathering of top academics who all shared an interest in the esoteric, he himself was an art historian, it eventually emerged that the great teacher in their presence was none of the doctors or professors, but the cleaning lady with the mop and pail at the back of the lecture theater. Such stories may have an apocryphal air about them, but they also have a universal resonance. The spiritual master of the greatest esoteric teacher of the 20th century, Rudolf Steiner, was a woodcutter and herb gatherer. Karl von Eckartshausen, the early theosophist, wrote, quote, "These sages, whose number is small, are children of light. Their business is to do as much good to humanity as is in their power, and to drink wisdom from the eternal fountain of truth. Some live in Europe, others in Africa, but they are bound together by the harmony of their souls, and they are therefore one. They are joined even though they may be thousands of miles apart from each other. They understand each other, although they speak in different tongues, because the language of the sages is spiritual perception. No evil person could possibly live among them, because he would be recognized immediately." End quote. People today freely and openly describe meetings with Indian mystics such as Mother Meera, who confer life-changing mystical experiences. On the other hand, we tend to be shy of ascribing supernatural powers to remarkable Christians these days, but you really do not need to look very far into the lives of the great Christian mystics to find evidence of psychic powers. Reading von Eckartshausen, you might suspect that he had been influenced by ideas from Hindu holy men. That may be true, but this should not stop us from recognizing that the great Christian mystics and Hindu adepts have much in common. I'm going to pause for just a second because I think I want to look up Mother Meera. I will recognize her if I see her because I think I actually did. Somebody took me to see her. Yep, that's her. I did meet her. It was interesting. I'm not going to say it was a life-altering meeting, but yeah, I did meet her. Okay, curiosity satisfied. The mystic John Tauler, for example, was a pupil of Meister Eckhart. The older man does not seem to have been Tauler's spiritual master in the sense in which we have just been using that phrase. Tauler was preaching in 1339 when he was approached by a mysterious layman from the Oberland, who told him his teaching lacked true spirituality. Tauler gave up his life and followed this man, who is supposed in some Rosicrucian traditions to have been a reincarnation of Zarathustra. Tauler disappeared for 2 years. When he reappeared, he tried to preach again, but could only stand there and cry. On his second attempt, he was inspired, and it was said of him that the Holy Spirit played upon him as upon a lute. Tauler himself said of his experience of initiation, quote, "My prayer is answered. God sent me the man long sought to teach me wisdom the schoolmen never knew." End quote. Tauler's is the mysticism of everyday life. When a poor man asked if he should stop working to go to church, Tauler replied, quote, "One can spin, another makes shoes, and these are the gifts of the Holy Spirit." End quote. In Tauler, we may recognize the great sincerity and practical probity of the German people. Martin Luther would say of him, quote, "Nowhere in either Latin or German have I found more wholesome, powerful teaching, nor any that more fully agrees with the Gospels." End quote. Of course, not all initiates are mystics, and neither is everyone who has genuine communication with the spirit worlds. Certain great individuals, such as Melchizedek, have been avatars, embodiments of great spiritual beings who are able to live in constant communication with the spirit worlds. Others, such as Isaiah, were initiates in previous incarnations, carrying the powers of an initiate into their new incarnation. The cosmos prepares people in different ways. Mozart is believed to have undergone a series of short incarnations which had the purpose of interrupting his experience of the spirit worlds only briefly, so that in his incarnation as Mozart, he could still hear the music of the spheres. Others, such as Joan of Arc, inhabit bodies that had that have been prepared to be so sensitive, so finely tuned that spirits of a very high level are able to work through them even though they are not in any sense incarnations of these spirits. Modern mediums are sometimes people who have suffered a trauma in childhood which has caused a rent in the membrane between the material and spirit worlds. And a lot of modern mystics are complete, or mediums are complete frauds too. Just throwing that out there. Not all. Anyone who has spent time with mediums or psychics accepts that they often, even routinely, receive information by supernatural means. Anyone, that is, whose cast of mind is not such that they are absolutely determined to disbelieve. However, it is equally apparent that most mediums cannot control spirits with whom they converse. Often they cannot even recognize them. These spirits are sometimes mischievous, giving them a lot of reliable information on trivial matters, but then tripping them up on important things. Unlike mediums, initiates are concerned to communicate their altered states of consciousness either directly, as happened to my friend in New York, or by teaching techniques to achieve altered states. The life of Christian Rosenkreutz is usually thought of as an allegory or a fantasy. In the secret tradition, the great being who had incarnated briefly in the 13th century as the boy with the luminous skin was incarnated again in 1378. He was born into a poor German family living on the border of Hesse and Thuringia. Orphaned at the age of 5, he was sent to live in a convent, where he learned Greek and Latin not very well. At the age of 16, he set out on a pilgrimage. He longed to visit the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. He traveled to Egypt, Libya, and Fez. He went to Cyprus, where a friend who was accompanying him died. Then on to Damascus and Jerusalem, and finally to somewhere called Damkar, where he studied for 3 years and was initiated by a Sufi brotherhood known as the Ikhwan al-Safa, or Brethren of Purity. During this time, he translated into Latin the Liber M, or Book of the World, said to contain the past and future history of the world. When he returned to Europe, he was determined to pass on what he had learned. He landed first in Spain, where he was laughed at. After several humiliations, he returned to Germany to live in seclusion. 5 years later, he gathered around him 3 old friends from his day in the convent. This was the beginning of the Fraternity of the Rosy Cross. He taught his friends with the initiatic sciences he had learned on his travels. Together they wrote a book containing, quote, all that man could desire, ask, and hope for, end quote. They also agreed to submit to 6 obligations: to heal the sick for free, to adopt the clothing and habits of the countries they visited in order to remain inconspicuous, that every year they would return to the house of Christian Rosenkreutz, now known as the House of the Holy Spirit, or otherwise send a letter explaining their absence. Before death, each brother would choose a successor whom he would initiate. They agreed that their fraternity would remain hidden for 100 years. They were joined by 4 more brothers before all 8 set out to the far corners of the earth in order to reform and transform it. The extraordinary supernatural gifts attributed to the Rosicrucians made them one of the greatest romantic legends of European history. They had the gift of great longevity. Rosencrantz died in 1485 at the age of 107. Because they knew, quote, the secrets of nature, end quote, and could command disembodied beings, they could exert their will magically, which they did mostly for the sake of performing healing miracles. They could read minds, understand all languages, even project living images of themselves over great distances, and communicate over great distances. They could also make themselves invisible. The great Kabbalist Robert Fludd was, according to esoteric tradition, one of the scholars employed by James I to work on the authorized version of the Bible. often thought to have been a Rosicrucian himself, he was at the least a well-informed and sympathetic fellow traveler. Flood came to the defense of the Brotherhood in print, repudiating accusations of black magic. He argued that the supernatural gifts of the Rosicrucians were the gifts of the Holy Spirit laid out by St. Paul in the Epistle to the Corinthians: prophecy, performing miracles, possession of languages, visions, healings, expelling demons. That the local parish priest could no longer do these things helps to account for Europe's growing fascination with the shadowy Rosicrucians. By all accounts, the priests of antiquity had been able to summon gods to appear in the inner sanctum of the temple, but following the Church's abolition of the distinction between soul and spirit in 869, the understanding of how to reach the spirit worlds had gradually been lost. By the 11th century, priests were no longer capable of summoning even visions of the spirit worlds during Mass. Now, in the 15th century, the spirit worlds began to flood back via the portal of the Rosicrucians. But there is something else Eckhart and Toller had talked of. I'm sorry, that there was a break there. But there was something else, period. Eckhart and Toller had talked of the material transformation of the body by spiritual practice. Eckhart had left intriguing hints at alchemy. Copper, he had said, is restless until it becomes mercury, but a more sympathetic account only began to emerge with Rosicrucianism. No other artist of the first rank has alchemical ideas quite so close to the surface as his work as Hieronymus Bosch. Little is known about the Dutch magus except that he was married and owned a horse, and is said to have contributed altarpieces and designs for stained glass windows in the cathedral of his native city of uh, Aachen. Aachen. It's Aachen. Bosch died in 1516, so he must have been painting while Christian Rosenkreutz was still alive. Rosenkrantz. He has it as Rosenkrantz, not Rosenkreutz. Um, while Christian Rosenkrantz was still alive. In the 1960s, Professor William Franger published a monumental study of Bosch in terms of the esoteric thought of the times in which the artist lived. Franger made sense of paintings which had otherwise just seemed baffling and weird. Many Bosch paintings have been labeled heaven, hell, or apocalypse, sometimes perhaps in a rather perfunctory way, just because they contain strange visionary elements not part of the conventional Christian iconography and theology. But in fact, Bosch's paintings are really deeply esoteric and contrary to church dogma. For example, it was not Bosch's view that unrepentant wrongdoers go to hell. That's it, and serve them right for eternity. He believed that after death, the spirit journeys through the sphere of the moon, then ascends through the planetary spheres to the highest heavens, then descends again into the next incarnation. The detail below from a panel of the Garden of Earthly Delights, conventionally labeled hell, in fact shows a spirit about to descend from one sphere to another. And I'll show you that in a minute when I get to that picture. According to Franger, Bosch's paintings, for example, the fabulous Table of Wisdom, also in the Prado in Madrid, shows that he knew of a technique for achieving altered states practiced in different esoteric schools around the world. According to Indian esoteric teaching, the golden lord of the cosmic powers, the Purusha, is at work both in the sun and in the pupil of the eye. In the Upanishads, it is written, quote, the Purusha, the Purusha in the mirror, on him I meditate, end quote. By staring at one's reflection mirrored in the right eye, you can expand your consciousness from contemplation of your limited ego self to contemplation of the sun-like God self at the heart of everything. This method was also practiced by the Dutch mystic Jan van Ruysbroek, who described how self-forgetting and world-forgetting leads at first to sensations of vacuity and chaos. Then the field of vision becomes charged with a cosmic energy. Images which at first appear dreamlike and chaotic suddenly move together in a meaningful way. This eye-to-eye method of meditation can also be practiced in a sexual context. An earlier mystic, Mechthild of Magdeburg, had had visions of a time when the life of sensuality would be fully integrated into the spiritual order of things. This impulse, she believed, would grow and take root in Northern Europe, where something very different from the asceticism of Ramon Lull emerged. Esoteric groups like the Brothers and Sisters of the Free Spirit, influential during Bosch's lifetime, were guided by a vision of communities held together not by law but by love. Wisely controlled, love is the way to divine perfection. Sex, as Franger puts it, is the knife blade. Okay, so we're finally to that picture, and it is detail from the Garden of Earthly Delights. I'll have to blow it up here a little bit. It's just a line drawing, so I'm not sure what's going on here. This person is about to drop through some sort of hole in the floor or portal. Someone is sitting up here with a cauldron wrapped around his neck. The bale of the cold cauldron. That's odd. Anyway, strange painting. I'd like to see the real thing, or a color picture of it anyway. Okay. The author most closely associated with the Rosicrucian Brotherhood, not least because some of his writings were said to have been buried with its founder, was Paracelsus. I am a rough man, quote unquote, said Paracelsus, born into a rough country, quote unquote. More specifically, he was born in a village near Okay. So, I don't know what the hell happened there, but I lost internet completely for a minute. So, we'll get right back into where we were. So I'll just start at the beginning of that page again, because I don't know where y'all dropped out. Um, okay, so what is going on here? Sorry, I kind of keep track of what's going on my phone for when I do have these weird dropouts. And I don't know why it's being flaky too. All right, well, we're up and running, I think. So we'll just pick up at the top of this page. The author most closely associated with the Rosicrucian Brotherhood, not least because some of his writings were said to have been buried with its founder, was Paracelsus. Quote, I am a rough man, said Paracelsus, born into a rough country, end quote. More specifically, he was born in a village near Zurich in 1493. A strange, aggressive character, he seems to never have grown a beard and to have retained a youthful appearance into old age. He went to study under Trithemius, abbot of St. Jacob, at Würzburg. I'm going to just close down Twitch altogether there real quick. Sorry. Trithemius was one of the greatest adepts of the day and teacher too of Cornelius Agrippa. Trithemius claimed to know how to send his thoughts on the wings of angels over hundreds of miles. He was asked by the Emperor Maximilian I to summon up the ghost of his dead wife, and when Trithemius obliged, the emperor was able to be sure that this phantom really was her by the mole on the back of her neck. Come on. Yeah, it's being really flaky. Okay. Paracelsus's fellow pupil, Cornelius Agrippa, became an itinerant intellectual vagabond surrounded by rumors of magic. His great black dog, Monseigneur, was said to be demonic, keeping his master informed of events in a 100-mile radius. De Occulta Philosophia was his attempt to write an encyclopedic account of practical Christianized Kabbalah, including a massive grimoire of magic spells still used by occultists today. However, Paracelsus does not seem to have been very impressed by Trithemius. It seems he did not want to study in a library but learned from experience. He went to live among miners in order to learn about minerals for himself. He also traveled widely from Ireland to the crocodile infested swamps of Africa, learning folk remedies and cures. In one way, he came to be seen as anticipating the Brothers Grimm, collecting ancient esoteric knowledge before it disappeared. He knew that consciousness was changed and that as the intellect developed, humanity would lose the instinctive knowledge of herbs that heal, a knowledge that up till then it had shared with the higher animals. On the cusp of that change, he wrote as systematic an account of these things as he could. In 1527, he set up as a doctor in Besle, I'm not sure if I pronounced that right, in Switzerland, and soon became famous for his miraculous cures. Naturally, he made enemies of doctors already working in the region. Paracelsus was scornful of the conventional medicine of the day. In a typical piece of bombast, he wrote of Galen, author of the standard medical textbooks of the day, quote, "If only your artists knew that their Prince Galen, they call none like him, was sticky in hell from where he has sent letters to me, they would make the sign of the cross upon themselves with a fox's tail." End quote. That's a very strange sentence. A very strange quote. His seemingly miraculous healing abilities attracted rumors of necromancy. He habitually carried a sword stick, in the pommel of which it was rumored he kept his most efficacious alchemical medicine. He cured a wealthy canon whom the other doctors had failed to cure, but when this man refused to pay, the local magistrates found in the canon's favor, and Paracelsus's friends advised him to flee. He spent years wandering. Nature, he said, was his teacher. Quote, "I desire neither to live comfortably nor do I wish to become rich. Happiness is better than riches, and happy is he who wanders about, possessing nothing that requires his care. He who wants to study the book of nature must wander with his feet over its leaves." End quote. You might think that this eminently sane philosophy, combined with a down-to-earth practical methodology, might lead to something approaching modern medical science. But some of the writings of Paracelsus are wild and strange. He wrote, for instance, of the monstra, an invisible being that may arise from the putrefaction of sperm. He also told about Mangonaria, a magical power of suspension by means of which heavy objects could be lifted into the air. He said he knew of certain localities where large numbers of elementals lived together, adopting human clothing and manners. Paracelsus also had strange and wonderful ideas about sleep and dreams. He said that during sleep, the sidereal body, the animal spirit, becomes free in its movement. It may rise up, he said, to the sphere of its ancestors and converse with the stars. He said that spirits wishing to make use of men often act on them during dreams, that a sleeping person can visit another in his dreams. He talked of incubi and succubi feeding on nocturnal emissions. Paracelsus was also a prophet, and in his later years took to prophesying the return of Elijah, who would come and restore all things, quote unquote. However, as well as these magical practices, Paracelsus did indeed make the discoveries and advances we will touch on later that have led some to call him, quote, the father of modern experimental medicine, end quote. In this paradox lies the key to understanding the secret of our age. Sometimes also said to be a Rosicrucian, though he nowhere made the claim himself, the great English magus Dr. Dee was motivated by an overwhelming desire to experience the spirit worlds directly. Dr. Dee is perhaps the greatest archetype of the magus since Zarathustra. The image of Dee has entered popular mainstream culture. Here is the black-gowned, skull-cap wearing wizard with a long white beard working in a laboratory surrounded by alchemical instruments. Amid flashes of lightning, he summons disembodied spirits by means of pentacles and other devices drawn on the ground with chalk. John Dee was born into a Welsh family living in London. A brilliant young scholar, he was teaching Euclid in Paris in his 20s and became a friend of Tycho Brahe. In the late 1570s, he formed a circle called Dionysi Areopagites. I don't. I'm sure I totally butchered that. With Sir Philip Sidney and Edmund Spenser, whose poem *The Fairy Queen* is famously replete with Rosicrucian and other esoteric imagery. A memoir of Sidney talks of him as seeking out the mysteries of chemistry led by Dee, quote unquote. Dee had built up a magnificent library said to be second only to that of the celebrated French historian Defoe. The Kabbalah was central to all his studies. He believed in the mathematical foundation of all things, a set of unifying principles he believed he could discern in the teachings of the ancients. He embodied these principles in his highly complex glyph, the Monus Hieroglyphica. And then we have a picture. I'm going to end up in an ad before I can get through the very long caption for it. So I'm going to show you the picture. And while the commercial's on, or the ad is on, I'm going to go get some more water. So here we go. You can study the picture of Paracelsus for a moment. Okay. Oh, we are in an ad. Figures. Well, we'll just sit here and have a sip of water while we wait this last 30 seconds. This picture reminds me somewhat of a view of the tarot cards, depending on which deck you are looking at. Sun, the moon, a couple of planets. Hey Vesper, how you doing? There, I think we're done with the ads now. So, I'll take us back to the reading so I can read the caption for that. Um, I'm doing pretty good tonight, Vesper, except for my internet dropped out right in the middle of reading, so I had to restart the stream, um, pick up where I left off. But other than that, it's been going pretty good. It's an interesting chapter so far. So the picture of Paracelsus we were just watching during the ad there, I'm going to read the very long caption for it. Paracelsus and his sword stick. One of the popular legends about Paracelsus was that he carried in the pommel of his sword stick a portion of the Azoth, a small thing missed in the Devil's Doctor. The excellent recent biography of Paracelsus by Philip Ball is that there is a sly joke in all of this. The Azoth was the name given to the secret fire of the alchemists, a fire that would liberate the soul from the body. It is contained in a seed. We may be reminded that in Indian alchemy, mercury is sometimes called the semen of Shiva. The sword of Paracelsus, then, is one that has been forged in the heat of sexual desire. It is a fleshly sword, and the azoth that issues from the top of it is the philosophical mercury. In the natural course of things, there is a quality in semen that is like a net in which a spirit may land and then be incarnated. Paracelsus also knew of some unnatural practices, secret sexual techniques performed before going to sleep that would loosen the vegetable body from the material body and could also help other kinds of spirits to come to earth and appear to him in dreams. So, yeah, that's all that for that one picture that we were just looking at. His sword stick. Anyway, yeah. Um, we're going to have another picture here almost immediately, but I've got one paragraph here. Dee's reputation was such that the young princess invited him to choose a date for her coronation as Elizabeth I by means of his astrological calculations. Dee also helped direct Elizabethan foreign policy, both in Europe and as regards the settling of America. It is a little known fact but documented that at the height of his fortunes Dr. Dee owned a charter granting him ownership of the vast land mass called Canada, and his vision of a British Empire, a phrase he coined, helped inspire and guide the nation's voyages of discovery. And then we have this next picture, the caption for which is the Monas Hieroglyphica, a my friend, the esoteric scholar Fred Gettings, has deconstructed this glyph, revealing a layer of meaning to do with the evaluation of the two parallel universes. We might call them the Baconian and the Shakespearean, we discussed in the previous chapter. Okay, so I'll show you that. So there are a number of things combined in this. I'll let you all come to your own conclusions as to what they all are. In 1580, evidently craving more direct spiritual experience, he decided to hook up with a medium. Dee's dreams had been disturbed. There had been strange knocking sounds in his house. He had employed a medium called Barnabas Saul, who said he could see angels in his crystal ball, but Dee had dismissed him after 6 months. Then in 1582 he met Edward Kelly, a strange man who apparently wore a skull cap to hide the fact that his ears had been cut off as a punishment for coining. I'm not sure what kind of crime coining is. I'll have to look that one up. Uh, Kelly claimed to be able to see the archangel Uriel in Dee's showstone. It's actually Shewstone. Shewstone. Um, and so began hundreds of seances. So it's basically like a crystal ball, as far as I know, or um, another version of a crystal ball-like thing is um, a mirror. It's not like a regular mirror, though. It's blacked out in a way that it's like if you took a piece of glass and just painted one side of it pure black, and then you use it like a mirror, it doesn't act like a normal mirror. It's for scrying and so on. Um, they also made them out of obsidian at one point, so that may be what he's referring to. I don't know exactly what the showstone was made out of that Dee used. Um, Okay, so began hundreds of seances. These enabled Dee to learn how to decipher the speech of the angels, which he called the Enochian or Enochian language. Enochian, I've heard several pronunciations. It's Enochian. I've always kind of said Enochian, but I've heard Enochian, whatever. Pronounce it however the hell you want to. The great Magus's decline can be traced from his association with Kelly. The man whose dreams of empire would help shape the globe was beginning to explore the more discreditable byways of esoteric speculation and practice. On a trip to Prague, Dee told the Holy Roman Emperor Rudolph II that he had tried for 40 years to find what he wanted, and no book had been able to tell him. He had therefore decided to call upon angels to intercede for him with God in order to ask the secrets of creation. He told Rudolph he used a stone for this and always made sure the spirits he dealt with were good and not demonic. Was Kelly always so scrupulous? On the same trip, the pair boasted to Rudolph that they could transform base metals into gold. They were forced to flee when they were unable to do so. It seems Kelly was abusing the old man by this time, forcing him into a humiliating wife swapping. Many suspected Kelly of being a fraud, of only pretending to receive responses to the Enochian invocations. Then in 1590, Kelly seems to have received a message in the Enochian language that so terrified him that he ceased operating the system and cut off all relations with Dee altogether. Translated from the angelic language into English, it reads as follows, quote, "The lion knoweth not where I walk, neither do the beasts of the field understand me. I am deflowered, yet a virgin. I sanctify and am not sanctified. Happy is he that embraceth me, for in the night season I am sweet. My lips are sweeter than health itself. I am a harlot for such as ravish me, and a virgin with such as know me not. Purge your streets, O ye sons of men, and wash your houses clean." End quote. Did Kelly see in this the scarlet harlot of Revelation and a vision of the imminent end of the world? I wonder if this is just throwing this out there. It was the first time he actually got a real communication and it freaked him out. Just a thought. Dee was left back in England in Lear-like penury, unable to support his family, ranting and raving, grandly paranoid, seeing everywhere conspiracy and counter-conspiracy. After his death, a cult of Dr. D emerged, and many, including the diarist John Aubrey and the eminent Freemason Elias Ashmole, or is it Elias Ashmole? I don't know, supposed him to have been a Rosicrucian. That that anyway is the pop story of D. A deeper layer of meaning, and D's real motivation in all of this concerns the history of humanity's relations with the spirit worlds. As we have seen, Christians were experiencing a withdrawal of the spirit worlds. The church seemed unable to provide direct spiritual experience or personal contact with spiritual realities. The people demanded wonders, and only the secret societies knew how to provide them. Dr. D had also told the Holy Roman Emperor that if his occult techniques of ceremonial magic were introduced, every church in Christendom could enjoy apparitions every day of the week. It would be a return to the spiritual fervor of the early church. The Church of Clement and Origen, where Kabbalistic and Hermetic elements were not excluded. Kabbalistic were not excluded. The world church would again become a magic church. This was Dr. D's great evangelical vision. It might seem outrageous to modern sensibility, but it's important to see it in the context of church practice at the time. As we have seen, it was impossible to draw a clear line between priestcraft and witchcraft. Yet to Dr. D, the magical, spirit-invoking practices of the parish priests seemed mere superstitious folklore, lacking in intellectual rigor, sophistication, and a systematic approach. The Neoplatonic drive to think systematically about spiritual experience and the spirit worlds had been spreading up from southern Europe, influencing scholars like Trithemius, Agrippa, and Dee. The German Johannes Reuchlin formulated a Christianized Kabbalah. He proved the divinity of Jesus Christ using Kabbalistic arguments, showing that the name of Jesus was encoded in the Tetragrammaton, or sacred name of God. Dee was undoubtedly interested in all these stories, but as we have seen, he craved experience. His approach was experimental as well as systematic. Dee was proposing reasoned application of techniques to produce spiritual phenomena on a controlled, regular, predictable basis. In Dee, as in Bacon, we see early stirrings of the scientific spirit, the development of the mental faculties that would be needed to devise modern science, evolved partly in an occult context. When Dee was whispering into the Holy Roman Emperor's ear, or what Dee was whispering into the Holy Emperor's ear, was that if he fasted for a set length of time, performed his breathing exercise for a prescribed number of times and at prescribed intervals, that if he engaged in this sexual practice and pronounced this formula at this astrological predetermined time, he would enter an altered state of consciousness in which he could communicate in a free and reasoned way with denizens of the spirit worlds. All this had been established by repeatable experiment and the precedent of thousands of years of practice and led to predictable results. Dee's mission then was to introduce something entirely new in the stream of history. It is always the aim of initiatic brotherhoods like the Rosicrucians to help spread newly evolving forms of consciousness appropriate for the changing times. Michael Meyer, a contemporary commentator, writing with apparent insider knowledge of the Rosicrucians, said, quote, "The activities of the Rose Cross are determined by the knowledge of history and by knowledge of the laws of evolution of the human race," end quote. These laws of evolution, quote unquote, operated both in history and in individual human lives. They are the laws that describe the paradoxical nature of life that we earlier called the deeper laws. They are described in the autobiography of a yogi by Paramahansa Yogananda as, quote, "subtler laws that rule the hidden spiritual planes and the inner realm of consciousness, knowable through the science of yoga," end quote. Formulations of these laws can be found scattered throughout Rosicrucian literature. Quote, "Heaven is never where we believe it to be. If you cease to limit a thing within yourself, that's to say by wanting it, and if you withdraw from it, it will come to you. That which kills produces life. That which causes death leads to resurrection. Rosicrucian concepts of these laws." Oh, that's the end of the quote. So Rosicrucian concept of these laws would shortly surface in the mainstream of history and transform the culture of the West. Perhaps as was wow. Perhaps what is most extraordinary about Dee's career is how close it runs to the surface of exoteric history. Not only was he openly installed at the court of Elizabeth the First as her resident Merlin, not only did he attempt to introduce ceremonial magic into the church under the aegis of the Holy Roman Emperor, but he was so well known that playwrights would portray him with and expect their audience to recognize him in Ben Jonson's The Alchemist and William Shakespeare's The Tempest. As we shall see, Dee was only the first of several strange and tragic personalities who tried to introduce esoteric doctrines into public life. And that is the end of chapter 21. So we're going to jump into chapter 22. And I will probably have to stop somewhere along the line and get some more water. Maybe, I don't know. I think this chapter's got more pictures, so it takes a yeah, it's got a couple. These heavy text chapters are a little tougher to get through without lots of water to keep the throat lubed. Okay, so chapter 22. Occult Catholicism, Jacob Boehm, the Conquistadors and the Counter-Reformation, Teresa, John of the Cross, and Ignatius, the Rosicrucian Manifestos, the Battle of White Mountain. Those are all of the different subjects that this chapter will cover. All right. In 1517, the Pope decided to revive the selling of indulgences in order to pay for a new basilica of St. Peter in Rome. It was to be the most splendid, lavish building in the world. Martin Luther, a teacher at Wittenberg, nailed his arguments against this selling of indulgences to the door of the local church that acted as a notice board to the community. When this drew a papal bull excommunicating Luther, he burned this document in front of an admiring crowd. "Here I stand," he proclaimed, quote unquote. In Northern Europe, Germany in particular, a groundswell of restlessness had been rising, a resenting of the demand for unthinking obedience, a yearning for spiritual freedom. The hero of the hour, Luther, escaped burning at the stake, protected by a local lord, and as more German leaders began to join in his protests against the excesses of the papacy, Protestantism was born. Some say Luther as the Some saw Luther as the reincarnation of Elijah, whom Malachi and then Joachim had prophesied would come again to herald the new age. Luther was steeped in mystical thought, the teachings of both Eckhart and Tauler. His closest friend and literary collaborator was the occultist Philip Melanchthon. That's a weird name. Melanchthon. Nephew of the celebrated Kabbalist Reuchlin. Melanchthon was a was an advocate of astrology who wrote a biography of Faust or Faust. Luther himself communicated with the spirit worlds on familiar terms, heard voices guiding him, and on one famous occasion hurled an inkpot at a demon who had mocked him. But was he an initiate of the secret societies? There are intriguing hints. He once referred to himself as a past master, not past as in P-A-S-T, P-A-S-S-E-D, master. A phrase that a Freemasonic initiate of a certain level might use to describe himself. He spoke approvingly of alchemy, praising it for its, quote, allegory and secret meaning, end quote, and recognizing, too, that it had a role in the resurrection of humanity. The interest of some commentators has also been piqued by the fact that Luther adopted the rose as his symbol. However, Luther's white five-petaled rose containing a small cross is not the mystic red rose of the Rosicrucians pinned to the great cross of matter in order to transform it, nor is there any reason to suppose that Luther saw his rose having a layer of meaning concerned with occult physiology. Although Paracelsus had been an early supporter of Luther, the Swiss magus grew disillusioned when Luther promulgated his doctrine of predestination, which seemed to Paracelsus the old Roman elitism under a new name. Moreover, Paracelsus was a pacifist, and while Luther was not directly responsible for the massacre of Catholics that took place once he had achieved political power, he could have stopped them. Although Luther had been swept to power on a tide of enthusiasm and mystical fervor, once there, he began to fear these things as threats to his authority and all he had achieved. Morbid and paranoid, he seemed unwilling to stop the persecutions carried out in his name. The Rosicrucians should be seen as the extreme radical left wing of the Reformation, and the way that the Lutheran Church turned on it can be seen in the story of Jacob Boehm. Boehm's Mysterium Magnum, a commentary on Genesis, opened up great and dizzying vistas of secret Kabbalistic meaning. It lit up the popular imagination in the great age of Protestantism, not least because of its influence on John Milton's Paradise Lost. His detailed descriptions of the occult physiology of the human body are the clearest evidence for an independent Western tradition of the chakras before the influx of Oriental teachings in the 18th century. He also gives a near comprehensive account of the correspondences between the heavenly bodies and minerals and plants that had been suggested earlier, but in more sketchy form by Agrippa and Paracelsus. All this is all the more astonishing because Boehm was almost completely uneducated. In some ways, he is anticipated by Flood in his interpretation of the Bible, which sees the story of the creation as a series of alchemical separations, but there is no evidence to suggest he ever read Flood. Born in 1575 to illiterate parents, Jacob Boehm was apprenticed to a cobbler. One day a stranger came to the shop, bought a pair of boots, then, as he was leaving, called Jacob by name, asking him to follow him into the street. Jacob was surprised this stranger knew his name, but more surprised when he fixed him with a penetrating stare and said, quote, Jacob, thou art yet but little, but the time will come when thou shalt be great, and the world shall be moved at thee. Read the Holy Scriptures, where thou wilt find comfort and instruction, for thou must endure such much misery and poverty and suffer persecution. But be courageous and persevere, for God loves thee. End quote. The stranger turned and disappeared, and Boehm never saw him again, but the meeting had made a deep impression upon him. He became much more serious in a way that some found disconcerting. When his master threw him out, he became a journeyman tradesman, working hard, and eventually he set up his own shop. One day he was sitting in his kitchen when the sun shining on a pewter plate blinded him. For a while everything grew dim. Then gradually the table, his hands, the walls, everything became transparent. He realized that although we usually think of the air as being transparent, it is actually quite cloudy, because now he saw it became truly transparent, like a cloud clearing, and suddenly he saw whole new spirit worlds opening up before him in every direction. He saw that his whole body was transparent and realized that he was looking down on himself, that his center of consciousness had floated free of his body and was able to move freely into the spirit worlds. So it was that Jacob Boehm first journeyed through the spiritual hierarchies while still alive, as St. Paul, Muhammad, and Dante had done before him. Boehm was generally physically unimpressive, short with a low forehead, but his remarkable blue eyes now began to shine with a special luminosity. People who met him were impressed by his ability to see into their past and their future. He was sometimes able to speak different languages from different parts of the world in different periods. His second illumination took place while he was walking through fields. He suddenly felt he could experience directly the mystery of creation. Afterwards he wrote, quote, "In 1/4 of an hour I saw and knew more than if I had been at university for many years." End quote. What Boehm had experienced did not contradict his Lutheran Bible-based beliefs, but it clarified and illumined them, opening up new dimensions of meaning. What distinguishes Boehm's writings, though, are his descriptions of these teachings, in terms of urgent personal experiences. He originally wrote his first work, Aurora, as an aide-memoire. It's French. Um, I'm going to just say aide-memoire, because I'll butcher it anyway. To one of his mystical experiences, so as an aide-memoire to one of his mystical experiences. But when a local nobleman saw it, he had several copies made. One of these fell into the hands of the local pastor of Görlitz. Perhaps jealous of someone who obviously knew so much more than he did of the spirit worlds, the pastor began to persecute the cobbler. He accused him of heresy, threatening prison, and finally driving him out of town under threat of being burned alive. Shortly after his expulsion, Boehm called his son, Tobias, to his bedside, asking if he could hear the beautiful music, and asking, too, if he would open the window so that he could hear it better. After a while he said, quote, "Now I go hence to paradise," end quote, gave a deep sigh, and died. In response to the question, where does a spirit go after death, Boehm had once answered in a way that has something of the Teutonic Zen of Eckhart. Quote, "It has no need to go anywhere. The spirit has heaven and hell within itself. Heaven and hell are within one another and are to one another as nothing." End quote. Boehm and the pastor of Görlitz had looked at each other across the village green with mutual incomprehension. These were two very different forms of consciousness. On the other side of the world, the disgust and intolerance that arises when two very different forms of consciousness encounter each other worked itself out on a much greater and more tragic scale. Less idealistic men had followed in the wake of Christopher Columbus. In 1519, Hernando Cortez had been sailing along the Yucatan Gulf coast when he established a base he called Vera Cruz. He and his fellow Spaniards had heard rumors of the fabulous wealth of the Aztecs, but they were astonished when an ambassador from their ruler Moctezuma approached the base bearing gifts. The gifts included a gold image of the sun as big as a cartwheel and an even larger silver representation of the moon. There was also a helmet overflowing with grains of gold and a great headdress made of feathers of the Quetzal bird. Quote unquote, Quetzal. The Aztec ambassador explained that these were the gifts his lord Moctezuma was giving to the great god Quetzalcoatl. This god, the ambassador further explained, had a long time previously quitted the earth to make the moon his home. The conquistadors then realized that Cortez's bearded, helmeted, and fair-skinned must resemble the prophetic depictions of Quetzalcoatl. By coincidence, as they saw it, they had arrived at precisely the time that the Aztec astrologers prophesied that this god would return. Some of the wonderfully intricate and delicate Aztec objects would be shipped back to Europe, where Albrecht Dürer saw them. He said that they were so subtle, so ingenious, they made his heart sing. But the followers of Cortez entertained other less elevated thoughts. When they arrived at the Aztec capital, Tenochtitlan, now Mexico City, they discovered it lay in the middle of a great lake, accessible only by narrow, artificial bridges that could easily be defended. But Moctezuma came out to greet them, bowed before the godly Cortez, and invited them to enter. Cortez's plan had been to kidnap Moctezuma and make off with the ransom. But when his men saw all the gold that lay about the palace, they impatiently killed the king. Because of this stupidity, they were able to escape only after a long battle. This was the beginning of one of the bloodiest episodes in history. The conquistadors heard rumors of a secret source of all the gold and of a gilded king, El Dorado, who bathed in liquid gold every morning. Walter Raleigh, who would join in the quest for this fabled king's city, was writing of Imperial El Dorado roofed with gold, quote unquote. Cortez's rival, Francisco Pizarro, sailed to Peru, intending to rob an entire country protected by tens of thousands, and to do it with an army of only 200. Like Cortez, he kidnapped the king after offering to meet him unarmed. As a ransom, he demanded that a room be filled to the ceiling with gold. For weeks, a procession of natives brought plates, goblets, and other finely wrought artifacts. But when the room was nearly full, the Spaniards claimed that the deal had been to fill the room with gold ingots. They began melting down the artifacts to create more space to fill. Eventually, as had happened with Cortez, Pizarro's men grew impatient and killed the king. Open hostilities broke out. When Pizarro's small army pushed its way into the capital, they found palaces with gold walls, golden furniture, statues of gods and animals, and golden armor. There was even an artificial garden in which the trees, flowers, and animals were made of gold, and a field 300 by 600 feet in which every stalk of maize was made of silver and its ears of gold. It is estimated that some 100,000 Aztecs were killed at the battle for Tenochtitlan, with the loss of only a handful of conquistadors. Has also been estimated that in the course of the conquest, some 2 million natives died. The natives would not the natives would not always be such easy meat. After a while, they learned to adopt the treacherous fighting mentality of the Europeans, and so the conquistadors began to take heavier casualties. The conquistadors never did find El Dorado, or mines, or any source of the gold that lay around the capitals in such abundance, but the gold from South America was sufficient to fund the Counter-Reformation, with its powerhouse in Spain, and enforced in large measure by the Spanish Inquisition. The Counter-Reformation made attendance at Mass compulsory. There were occult forces and initiatic brotherhoods at work in the service of the Counter-Reformation, too. The world's greatest library of occult literature is to be found in the Vatican. The Church has never believed that the occult sciences do not work. It has only sought to keep exclusive control of them. Sociologists have attributed religion's power over the people to its ability to explain life's unknown, numinous dimensions, and so keep dread at bay. Religion must seem to be able to manage the dark volcanic power of the spirits which sometimes erupts into the material world. Okay, so we have a picture. I'll read the caption and bring up the picture, and I already need another refill, so I'll go do that while you're looking at the picture. In 17th century Catholicism, esoteric teachings rose very near the surface. The visions of Marie de Devaly and Marie Alacoque led to popular church teachings on the mysteries of the Sacred Heart. In the 20th century in London, where I work, the most occult bookshop, by occult I mean an emphasis on supernatural happenings such as levitations, apparitions, bodily transmogrifications, is not one of the obvious ones which advertise themselves as such, but the Padre Pio bookshop in the shadow of Westminster Cathedral. Okay, that was the caption, so here is the picture. And I'll be gone just long enough to refill my water, and I'll be right back. The Sacred Heart. How did I lose my fucking action? Okay, here we go. So, the Sacred Heart. And this thing with the two spiraling double-ended arrows, or maybe they're not. Yeah, they're double-ended. I don't know. It is reminiscent of the caduceus in my mind, but that's just me. Um, in Northern Europe, many have made spiritual quests outside Roman Catholicism. Spain was galvanized by a mysticism equally dark and dangerous, but operating within the church. Teresa was born in Avila near Madrid in 1515, probably to a family of Jewish converts. She ran away from home to join a nunnery. There, while ill, she drifted out of everyday consciousness and into a mystical state. When the states kept returning, she used the manuals of medieval mystics and texts by Ramon Lull as guides to achieving a working knowledge of mystical experience. Teresa's mystical ecstasy upon encountering a seraph was, of course, sculpted by Bernini, the great initiate artist of the Counter-Reformation. Quote, he was not tall but short, marvelously beautiful. In his hands was a long golden spear, and at the point of the iron there seemed to be a little fire, that he thrust several times into my heart. He drew out the spear, leaving me all on fire with a wonderful love of God, so exciting, sweet in this greatest of pains. End quote. There is an irrepressible suggestion of sexual ecstasy about this that invites comparison with the sex magical practices of mystical societies of the same period. These practices are among the most closely guarded secrets of esoteric lore, and we will examine them in Chapter 25. Teresa's spiritual journals also describe an ascent of the soul that ties in with Kabbalistic accounts of the ascent of the Sephirothic tree. She describes out of body experiences and the soul's organs of spiritual vision, the chakras, which she calls, quote, the eyes of the soul, end quote. But though her writing might be informed by a knowledge of the Kabbalah, what comes through most strongly is an immediate account of direct personal experience, an understanding of the way the spirit worlds work, which is rare outside of India. There is no element of inauthenticity or literary artifice. Okay, so then we have a picture. The caption is very short on this one. Ecstasy of Saint Teresa in the Cornaro Chapel in Rome. So let me bring that up. It's just a line drawing. Um, a little difficult to tell everything that's going on, but you'll get the gist. So this would be Teresa. This is the angel, and the spear he's thrusting into her heart repeatedly. Okay, and that is followed immediately by another picture. The caption is other levitating saints included Thomas Aquinas, Catherine of Siena, Francis of Assisi, Joseph of Cupertino, and in the 20th century, Padre Pio and Gemma Galgani, I'm going to say. Yeah. Anyway, so here we have what looks to be four angels carrying someone. Okay. Moving on, moving on, moving on. St. Teresa's extreme spiritual states sometimes induced supernatural phenomena, including frequent levitations. These were witnessed by many. Nuns would struggle to hold her down. It would be a mistake to assume that the experience of bodily levitation is necessarily a blissful one. Teresa talks of being, quote, suspended between heaven and earth and receiving no comfort from either, end quote. There is in this some of the sense of loneliness, of spiritual aridity, which had been depicted by Eckhart, and which would be given its finest defining expression by Teresa's pupil, St. John of the Cross. Because we live in an age when experiences of the spirit worlds are rare, there is a danger that we read St. Teresa or her pupil St. John of the Cross as mere allegory, an idealized account of finer feelings, or even as a description of relatively trivial mood changes described in an aspirational or wishful thinking way. But St. John of the Cross's account of his dark night of the soul, written after a period in prison in solitary confinement, is an account not of altered moods, but of an altered state of consciousness, an alteration of mental faculties as radical as that achieved by taking hallucinogenic drugs. The Spanish throw themselves at death. The work of their mystics, writers, and artists shows they keep the imminence of death in mind, not in a theoretical way, but a pressing existential way. They see it weaving around them and through them. They are ready to wrestle with it. They risk defeat by it in order to snatch what is most valuable in life from its jaws. This Spanish spirit finds electrifying expression in The Dark Night of the Soul. We have touched on the mystic death, the stage in the process of initiation the candidate must pass through. After the first comforting, illumining manifestations of the Spirit, the candidate is pitched into a state of profound misery. Not only does he have no doubt that he is about to die, he has no doubt God has abandoned him, that the whole cosmos finds him despicable. He does not now even want anything more than the shady half existence he is being shown. And we have another picture. Um, this one is Bernini's famous obelisk of Santa Maria sopra Minerva is derived from Alberti's Hypnerotomachia. Hypnerotomachia. As we have seen, also a key occult influence on Leonardo. So, bring that up. Interesting. This looks like stairs here down behind the elephant. And it looks like the elephant is standing next to the obelisk. It's not coming up through the elephant. Um, that's my perspective anyway. It looks like it's the obelisk is behind him. Anyway, if John is describing this experience in terms which are recognizable to us today, this is partly because he helped formulate the very language we use to describe the beginnings of the Spirit's journey through purgatory, the sphere of the moon. In John's account, there is also a prophetic level of meaning. He was anticipating an era of history in which incarnated humanity as a whole would have to go through its own dark night of the soul. But perhaps the most characteristic form of occultism is what would become known as the Counter Reformation. What? But perhaps the most characteristic form of occultism in what would become known as the Counter Reformation was the Jesuits. Ignatius Loyola was a professional soldier. When his right leg was shattered during a siege at Pamplona, he was invalided out of the Spanish army. During a period of convalescence, he was reading a book on the lives of the saints when he realized his religious vocation. So in 1534, while studying in Paris, he gathered around him 7 fellow students to form a brotherhood. They were to be the highly disciplined soldiers of the church. In 1540, the Pope recognized this order as the Society of Jesus. The Jesuits were to be the church's intellectual elite, its military intelligence, servants unto death, searching out heresy and unlawful entry into the spirit worlds. The Jesuits also became the Pope's educators and missionaries, instituting a rigorous system that would orient the young towards Rome and instill obedience. They also had remarkable successes as missionaries in Central and South America and in India. Ignatius Loyola devised trials and techniques for achieving altered states that included breathing exercises, sleep deprivation, meditation on skulls, training in lucid dreaming, and in active imagination. This latter involved constructing an elaborate sensual mental image which a disembodied spirit might inhabit, a process known to the Rosicrucians as building a hut by the palace of wisdom, quote unquote. However, in Loyola's exercises, there is a subtle but important difference. While the Rosicrucian techniques were designed to help achieve a free-willed, free-thinking exchange with beings from higher hierarchies, the spiritual exercises of Ignatius Loyola are intended to still the will and induce a state of unquestioning obedience like a soldier's. Quote, take, Lord, and achieve, and quote, take, Lord, and receive all my memory by my understanding and my whole will, everything I have, end quote. Sorry about stumbling through that. Good thing we're getting close to the end here. In the West, esoteric bookshops are dominated by Hindu, Buddhist, and other Oriental esoteric literature, but the spiritual exercises of Ignatius Loyola remain the most readable, available, and widely published esoteric techniques from the Western tradition. And we have another picture, followed by a second picture. So, for the first one, the caption is El Greco's stretched figures have eyes that are half closed as they contemplate some inner mystery. They stand in convulsive landscapes and stormy skyscapes. Not only does El Greco portray people in altered and mystical states, but he conveys a sense of what it is like to be in that state. Rene Hugues, Hugh, I don't know, Huyghhe, the French art critic, analyzed the light in El Greco's panoramic view of Toledo. In reality, Toledo is bathed in a fierce, clear Mediterranean light, whilst in El Greco's vision, The ordinary light of day has been swallowed up by a fantastic supernatural light. As an initiate, El Greco painted what St. John of the Cross described when he wrote of the dark night of the fire of love without a guiding light other than that which was burning in my heart, quote unquote. And so here's the picture by El Greco. It does look rather stormy. It'd be nice to see the original. A lot of these black and whites, I think, just don't do the pictures justice. So we'll have to look some of them up. So the next one is Mary as Isis the Moon Goddess by Murillo, or Murillo, if you want to pronounce it that way. I don't know. I am not an art connoisseur, so I don't know these names. So Mary as Isis, the moon goddess. I do see part of the crescent moon down here. Okay. In 1985, a book was published anonymously called Meditations on the Tarot. It created a big stir in esoteric circles because it shows in an extremely erudite fashion that the symbolism in the tarot cards points to a unified set of beliefs underlying Hermeticism, the Kabbalah, Oriental philosophies, and Catholic Christianity. This book is a wonderful treasure chest of esoteric lore and wisdom. It later emerged that the author was Valentine Tomberg, who had been initiated by Rudolf Steiner, but then left Steiner's anthroposophy to become a Catholic convert. The underlying purpose of Meditations on the Tarot, to try to draw those interested in esoterica back into the church, becomes apparent when you know this. Was there any intellectual dishonesty involved? Tomberg, like Loyola before him, was working to ensure that the initiative in esoteric matters should not entirely be taken away from Rome. We looked at the lives of some individuals working in Northern Europe. It seems more or less in isolation. Eckhart, Paracelsus, D. Boehm. What is the evidence of a network of anything like the rumored secret society of Rosicrucians? Is there any documentary evidence to support the rumors about secret brotherhoods? In 1596, a man called Beaumont was convicted of magical practices by a court at Angoulême in France. As the famous French historian Defoe recorded, Beaumont confessed that he, quote, held commerce with aerial and heavenly spirits, that schools and professors of this noble art had been frequent in all parts of the world, and still were so in Spain at Toledo, Cordova, Granada, and other places, that they had also been formerly celebrated in Germany, but for the most part had failed since Luther had sown the seeds of his heresy and began to have so many followers that in France and in England it was still secretly preserved, as it were by tradition, in the families of certain gentlemen, but that only the initiated were admitted into the sacred rites to the exclusion of profane persons. End quote. Long, convoluted quote. Then, less than 30 years later, a series of short pamphlets began to appear which purported to give the inside story. Published anonymously in Kassel, in Germany, in between 1614 and 1616, the first was called the Fama Fraternitatis, or Rumor of the Brotherhood, and it called for a spiritual revolution. The second, the Confessio Fraternitatis, told the story of CRC, Christian Rosenkreutz, the founder of the Brotherhood, gave an account of the rules he instituted and also revealed that his tomb had been discovered in 1604. A door had been uncovered underneath an altar leading down to a crypt. The door carried an inscription: "After 120 years I shall be opened." Down below was a seven-sided mausoleum, each side being 8 feet high, with an artificial sun suspended in the middle above a circular table. Underneath this table lay the uncorrupted body of CRC, surrounded by books, including the Bible and a text by Paracelsus, and the body was clutching a rolled scroll which bore the words, quote, "Out of God we are born, we die in Jesus, we will be reborn through the Holy Spirit," end quote. An observant literary detective might have noticed that the title page of the first folio of this second pamphlet featured the unique and unmistakable shape of Dr. Dee's occult emblem of evolved consciousness, the Monas Hieroglyphica. The third pamphlet, The Chemical Wedding of Christian Rosenkreutz, was an allegorical account of initiation, a sex magical chemical marriage in the tradition of the Hypnerotomachia. That is a tough one. These publications caused a sensation across Europe. Who were the Rosicrucian brothers and who was the author? Then it gradually emerged that the author was a young Lutheran pastor called John Valentin André. His spiritual mentor had been a famous mystic, Jean Arndt, the disciple of John Tauler, disciple in his turn of Meister Eckhart. Anyone who considers the claims of esoteric history is frustrated by the sparse nature of the evidence. Almost by definition, the operations of secret societies leave scant traces. If they are successful, they leave little to go on. Yet the claims are very grand indeed, that these societies are representatives of an ancient and universal philosophy, that this is a coherent, consistent philosophy that explains the universe more adequately than any other, and that many, if not most, of the great men and women of history are guided by it. Anyone considering this dichotomy naturally asks, can these societies really involve a secret coalition of the greatest geniuses, or is it really just the fantasy of a few isolated and marginal people who are really a bit dim? This is perhaps a good juncture to confront this question, because for the past few pages we've been following two traditions running very closely parallel: the largely exoteric tradition of great mystics, passing from one generation to another, and a largely esoteric tradition, an apparently loose association of magicians and occultists. The mystical force behind the Reformation, a chain of initiates that connects Eckhart, Tauler, and Arndt with the network of magi that includes Rosenkranz, Paracelsus, and Dee. We have just seen how in 1614 these two traditions finally became inextricably intertwined in the person of Valentine André. The hidden hand of the secret societies does not often show itself, and as we saw in the case of Dr. Dee's Lear-like disgrace, when it does, it puts itself in danger. It changes its very nature, risking losing its power as soon as it emerges into the light of day. In the years following the publication of the Fama, the Rosicrucians would come out of the shadows to the sound of cannons and muskets. They would fight a bloody and hopeless battle against the Jesuits for the spirit of Europe. In conventional histories, skeptical of the Rosicrucian manifestos and suspecting them to be just a fantasy, their publication marked the beginning of the Rosicrucian phenomenon. In this secret history, the manifestos marked the end of true Rosicrucians, or at least the beginning of the end. The publications of these manifestos at the beginning of the 17th century also marked the founding of another secret society that would dominate world affairs up until the present day. The institution of the Holy Roman Empire, founded by Charlemagne in 800, was built on the ideal of a world leader who, with the Pope's blessing, held Christendom together and defended the faith. This ideal was shining less brightly by the beginning of the 17th century. No Holy Roman Emperor had been crowned between 1530 and Rudolph II's coronation in 1576, and many of the small kingdoms and princedoms of Germany had become Protestant, which naturally undermined any notion of a Europe united under a Roman emperor. Following the death of Rudolph, the tolerant, intellectually curious, and occult-minded emperor whom Dr. Dee had failed to impress, a dispute over his succession drew the Rosicrucian Brotherhood into a plot. If Frederick V, a Rhineland prince and Rosicrucian fellow traveler, could be placed on the Bohemian throne, then Europe might be seized for Protestantism. The Rosicrucians had been cultivating James I of England. Michael Meyer, whose alchemical prints are among the most explicit ever printed, sent him a Rosicrucian greeting card. In 1617, Robert Flood dedicated his work of esoteric cosmology, Utrisque Cosmi Historia, to James, saluting him with an epithet sacred to Hermes Trismegistus. In 1612, James's daughter Elizabeth married Frederick. The Tempest was given a special performance at court to celebrate the wedding day, with the mask scene newly inserted. We may say with a small degree of literary artifice that Dee was there in spirit. The plan was that when, in 1619, Frederick traveled from Heidelberg to Prague to be crowned, James would move to defend his romantic teenage son-in-law with his young bride from Catholic attack. In the event, James did nothing when Frederick's forces were decisively defeated at the Battle of White Mountain. Frederick and Elizabeth had to flee Prague, and because they had reigned for such a laughably short time, they were known forever after as the Winter King and Queen. The 30 Years' War was waged by Ferdinand of the great Catholic dynasty of the Habsburgs, whose intellectual outriders were the Jesuits. The aim of the Habsburgs was to re-establish Catholic supremacy in Europe. During this time, 5 out of 6 German towns and villages were destroyed, and the population reduced from some 9 million to 4 million. The Rosicrucian dream was destroyed in a carnival of bigotry, torture, and mass slaughter. Central Europe was a desert. Yet the Church's victory was a Pyrrhic one. If the Church really saw itself as engaged in warfare with the secret societies, fighting black magic, then perhaps it was making the mistake of believing its own propaganda. The real enemy was the oldest enemy of all in a new disguise. And that is the end of that chapter. That takes us to chapter 23, which we will pick up this coming Tuesday. That will be, the title of this one is The Occult Roots of Science, Isaac Newton, The Secret Mission of Freemasonry, Elias Ashmole and the Chain of Transmission, and What Really Happens in Alchemy. So we will leave it off there, and we'll see if there's anybody around to... Oh yeah, Mr. Blitzer's on. I will take us on over there, and I'll see you there in a few minutes. Oh, whoops. That would be the wrong screen. Let's go to that one instead. Load up the screen.
Feeling shattered skies.
Give him a few minutes of your time.
Watching teary blue eyes. Wonder where I might find some peace of mind. Not much luck I've had, but more sophisticated into love relations. Now disassembling my own heart, 'cause my mind's a million places and giving up. So it's in my head. Thank